Well, speak of the devil, yesterday I was wondering in my video about how the U.S. is invading Iraq now for the second time in 20 years. Whatever happened to those Iraq protests that we heard so much about a couple weeks ago, in which there was a lot of action going on. There were protests in multiple cities, and it was a non-sectarian uprising similar to what's going on now in Lebanon that people are talking so much about. You had uprisings in Baghdad and Basra, of course, and I think to a certain extent Mosul, maybe. But anyway, many cities across Iraq, and then all of a sudden, and we heard weird things about, supposed snipers, in all black that were people accused, the Iranians of putting in there, and people were getting shot by mysterious snipers, and the government said, well, they're not our guys, we don't know who they are, and then that all just seemed to go away. The protests just sort of one day up and died in smoke, and it was strange because a lot of people had been shot and killed, and you would think that there would be some anger after all that, but I guess people were successfully intimidated into not protesting anymore. That is until this week. It was either today or yesterday that protests in Baghdad's flared up again. Now, from what I understand, this is not connected to the U.S. Withdrawal from Syria into Iraq, which was not authorized, and I thought would be quite offensive to the Iraqi people who don't want the U.S. there anyway. That the U.S. was coming in there without permission. I don't. From what I'm reading, there's no connection between the protests flaring up again today and that event. But the message of the protesters hasn't changed much in the past 3 weeks since they died down initially. They're still very upset at the current government, and they want them out. Now, the prior protests were, broadly anti-establishment in nature and just sort of didn't like anyone that was in power and, blamed them for there being, high unemployment and poor government services is how it's, the phrase is normally translated. I assume they mean things like, the water and the electricity and things like that. Of course, in a lot of countries, they have problems with electricity being unreliable for there being brownouts, and that happens a lot in these less developed countries that a lot of the times have, nationalized electrical grids and is sort of a state energy provider. And really, there's no excuse for Iraq to have, an unreliable supply of energy, considering that, they're a petrostate, practically. They've got plenty of fuel to generate all the electricity that they could ever need. In fact, the government, I don't think this would necessarily be a great idea, but the government probably could make electricity free and have no trouble providing it. The problem, of course, is not in the ability of electricity and clean water and things like that to be supplied to the people. It's not a matter of not having enough money in the government. It's a matter of one, corruption, and two, just general inefficiencies. Very relatively boring things about government. They're not mad over anything, sexy like some sort of treason scandal to where they found out that, the prime minister is secretly, a puppet of a foreign government or something, although arguably the prime minister is a puppet of a foreign government. I guess his enemies would probably characterize him that way. But that's not the crux of the issue. People seem generally just upset that the government is not being run very well, and that they're not necessarily upset at that the government is tyrannical. Well, of course they're saying that too, saying that the government is too tough on people and things like that. But their main concern is just that, hey, we have an understanding that the government's going to do basic things, offer basic services to us, and that's not being fulfilled. And now the question of what to do about all this is expanding, or rather, we're hearing more responses from people and ideas. I already mentioned that there's pretty much a general distaste for the political establishment in Iraq, and the establishment that's been I guess, in power since 2005, when the current constitution came into effect, which was put in place after the U.S. overthrew Saddam Hussein's government. And it seems more clear to me now that the protesters sort of link the political establishment to the political institutions. They consider that to be a part of the establishment. They consider the Constitution of 2005 to be a part of the problem, as much of a problem as the actual people that are in power. So it's not just that, oh, well, our government has bad people. They're saying, no, our government is a bad system, a system that should be changed to something else. And unfortunately, I really wish that I was able to read some of the Arabic sources, because the stuff in English is not very detailed. But there seemed in the Al Jazeera article I read to be interesting points, or at least one point that was made by some individuals in these protests, that the Constitution of 2005 has led to a sectarian conflict in Iraq. And of course, it's no secret that there's been sectarian conflict in Iraq. I mean, after the implementation of this Constitution, there was an Iraqi civil war, which the U.S. Fought on behalf of the Shiites, the friends of Iran, against the Sunnis. And the reason why the Sunnis fought an insurgency against this constitution was because it made them powerless. Because if your government is based purely on majority rule, and you have this national parliament, well, then all that matters is how big your group is. And so if you're in the minority like the Sunnis are, well, then it sucks to be you, but you're not going to make any of the decisions. The Shiites run the country now, and that's what the effect of the U.S. invasion was. Democracy in Iraq means that one of the three sects gets to boss around the other two. And at least, for the Kurds, they have their semi-autonomy, so maybe they're a little less aggrieved than the Sunnis are. But the Sunnis have absolutely no say in their own government. Sunni Arabs, I should specify, because most Kurds, I believe, are also Sunni Muslims. But the Sunni Arabs in western Iraq, those are the most disenfranchised of the people. Those were the real losers of the U.S. invasion, because, of course, Saddam was a Sunni Arab. So for 40 years, or however long Saddam was in power, I don't think it was quite that long, but as the Sunnis held power, they were the ones who ran Iraq. They were the ones who were on top. And now, interestingly, this uprising, though, of people who apparently are against the 2005 Constitution, partially because it increased, the sectarian divisions in Iraq, are mostly Shiites, because these uprisings are occurring in the Shiite cities in Iraq. We're not hearing, about, popular uprisings in Fallujah, at least I don't think. This really seems to be a Shiite movement against the Shiite government. And so we know now that they don't like the 2005 Constitution. They don't like this parliamentary mass democracy thing, to where, all of the people in Iraq have to vote and elect this, single parliament that rules them all, and that has, absolute power. They don't like that system. So it'd be interesting to talk to some of these people to find out what they'd want to replace it with. Do they want some kind of federated or confederation, to where the Kurds, the Sunni Arabs, and the Shiite Arabs have essentially three different governments. There have been people who talked about that in the past, but there also in the past was a sort of a pan-Iraqi movement, I believe led by Muqtada al-Sadr, and of course that was smacked down by the U.S. in favor of Shiite supremacy. And so it'd be interesting to talk to some of these protesters and see if maybe they're Sadrists of some form. I don't think they could technically be Sadrists, because I think, or no, maybe Sadr is a Shiite. I should look that up afterwards. I'm not sure. But of course, if they were, if they did believe in this sort of pan-Iraqi nationalism type of idea, then having the national parliament wouldn't be such a bad idea. But of course, again, without getting into reading Arabic tweets and things like that and finding out what these people are actually saying, the news reports are not detailed enough for me to really know what they're talking about. I mean, for all I know, these people could be protesting in favor of restoring the Hashemite monarchy, which frankly is not such a bad idea. I mean, if you look at how the Hashemites have done in Jordan, I mean, Jordan's been a pretty stable country. Sure, is it exceedingly free? No, but I mean, by Middle East standards, I think Jordan's doing okay. No, they're not Saudi Arabia. They're not this terrible absolute monarchy where people are living in chains. But at the same time, it's been pretty stable. Of course, it's I mean this only in jest, because it's completely unrealistic to think that the Hashemites would be reinstalled in Baghdad. That's never going to happen. I mean, the Hashemites only came to power in Baghdad because the British put them there. The Hashemites historically have been British allies, even though they were I pretty much betrayed by the British after World War I, in which the Sykes-Picot Agreement carved up the Middle East into British and French spheres of influence. The Hashemites had been promised, I believe, that they would lead a unified Arab kingdom, which would consist of modern the Arabian Peninsula, the Levant, and Mesopotamia. Basically the former Ottoman Empire that was not Turkey, the non-Turkish parts, all of the Near East essentially would be under Hashemite rule. That didn't pan out. The French did not install monarchies in their in where they held influence, that being of course Syria and Lebanon, even though a Hashemite had proclaimed himself the king of Syria at the end of World War I. But anyway, all that's way off topic. Essentially, the Iraqi protests, I think, are not going away. I'm not so sure that they're going to lead to anything substantive, but it does seem somewhat interesting to me, because I don't quite know where to put them yet. I'm not sure what box to put them in. And so for that reason, I'm going to keep an eye on this, and I will be following up when I have some more information on it. So if you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I do upload every day, and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.